quiet suburbs of Richmond, British Columbia, a chilling mystery unfolded over the course of 7 agonizing years. A respected nurse and loving daughter, Cindy James, reported being stalked, harassed, and attacked by an unknown assailant. But when her lifeless body was finally discovered in 1989, bound and drugged in a ditch, the horror didn't end. Instead, the mystery deepened. Was Cindy the victim of a long campaign of terror that culminated in murder? Or had she been fighting demons of her own, perhaps ones no one else could see? What happened to Cindy James remains one of Canada's most baffling, disturbing, and controversial unsolved cases. This is her story. The victim. Cindy James was a 44-year-old nurse and former administrator at a local children's psychiatric hospital. Born in 1944, she was described as intelligent, compassionate, and meticulous. Those close to her said she was kind and soft-spoken, but also fiercely private and unusually composed even under pressure. Cindy had recently separated from her husband, Dr. Roy Makepeace, a prominent psychiatrist, after 16 years of marriage. Their split, while described as amicable, would later become a point of intense scrutiny. The beginning of the nightmare. The terror began in 1982, shortly after the separation. Cindy told police she was receiving threatening phone calls, strange, raspy voices, whispering obscenities and making chilling threats. Sometimes the caller said nothing at all, just breathing heavily into the phone before hanging up. Then came notes, handwritten, crude, often pasted together from magazine letters like something out of a movie ransom scene. Some were shoved through her mail slot, others were left on her doorstep, and the messages grew darker over time. The threats escalated into outright attacks. Cindy reported multiple break-ins where furniture had been slashed and her belongings overturned. Her pet cat was found dead, strangled with a string tied around its neck. She claimed to have been physically assaulted several times, including one incident where she was found semi-conscious in her basement, with a nylon stocking tightly knotted around her neck. These weren't empty claims. Several of Cindy's friends, including her close confidants, Agnes and Tom Woodcock, witnessed the aftermath of these alleged attacks. In one incident, they arrived at her house to find the window shattered and Cindy hiding in terror. Another time, she was discovered outside her home, bloody and dazed, with a knife stabbed through her hand, pinning it to the ground. The investigation. Over the next several years, Cindy reported over 100 incidents to the police. She even hired private investigators, including one named Ozzy Caban, who later testified that he believed Cindy was genuinely terrified and not fabricating the threats. Police put surveillance on her home, sometimes openly, other times covertly. But no attacks ever occurred while police were watching. No suspect was ever captured. No fingerprints, no DNA, no definitive physical evidence that anyone other than Cindy had been involved. As the case dragged on, police began to doubt her. They reportedly believed she was orchestrating the incidents herself. Maybe it was for attention. Maybe it was a cry for help. Maybe she had some form of dissociative disorder. Cindy, they suggested, might be faking her victimhood and inflicting harm on herself. But that didn't explain everything. How could she have tied herself up in such elaborate ways? Why would she mutilate her own home, kill her cat, and live in constant fear for years on end? Her family and friends were adamant this wasn't someone looking for drama. This was someone under siege. The struggle with mental health. As the years wore on, Cindy became increasingly paranoid and withdrawn. Her once carefully composed demeanor started to crack. She moved homes multiple times, changed her phone number, and even underwent hypnotherapy. Despite repeated psychiatric evaluations, including sessions with her ex-husband, Dr. Makepeace, she was never formally diagnosed with any major psychiatric disorder, though anxiety, depression, and trauma were clear. There were periods of hospitalization after apparent suicide attempts. Cindy herself once admitted she didn't want to die, but she wanted the pain and fear to end. Her mental state continued to deteriorate. She told friends she feared speaking openly, worried that doing so would endanger them. Her life had become a prison, and she was the prisoner, locked in fear, unable to escape. The final days. In May 1989, Cindy disappeared. She had just spoken with her parents earlier that day and seemed stable. Her car was later found in a shopping mall parking lot. Inside were groceries, a wrapped gift, and signs of a struggle. Blood on the driver's side door and items strewn across the seat. Police launched a search, but days turned into weeks. 2 weeks later, on June 8th, her body was discovered in the backyard of an abandoned house, a place that had been searched earlier, with no result. She was found lying on her side, hands and feet bound behind her back with a complex series of knots. A black nylon stocking had been tightly wrapped around her neck. Autopsy reports revealed she had lethal levels of morphine and other sedatives in her system, enough to render her unconscious long before death. There were no signs she had injected herself, and yet there were no clear signs of a struggle either. The scene was surreal. It looked staged. It looked planned. But by whom? Suicide or murder? The coroner's jury ultimately ruled the cause of death as undetermined, unable to say whether it was suicide, homicide, or an accident. But the question remains, could Cindy have killed herself? Critics argue it's unlikely. The dosage of morphine in her body would have incapacitated her, quickly making it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to then bind herself in such a complicated fashion. The knots were tight, precise, not the kind typically associated with suicide staging. Supporters of the suicide theory point to her mental health struggles and the lack of concrete evidence of an outside attacker. They believe Cindy's torment may have been self-inflicted, perhaps a result of a deep psychological fracture triggered by trauma, isolation, or a desperate need to be rescued. But others refuse to accept that. Her friends, family, and even some experts point out that the police failed Cindy by not taking her initial report seriously, by not investigating her husband more thoroughly, and by dismissing years of terror as fantasy. Dr. Makepeace, for example, was questioned early on, but was later cleared. Still, suspicion lingered, especially given his psychiatric background and the control he may have held over Cindy during and after their marriage. There's also the theory that someone else, perhaps a patient, a stranger, or even someone she trusted, had been tormenting her all along. The meticulous stalking, the psychological warfare, the silent phone calls, these suggest a perpetrator who enjoyed control, a sadist, someone who wanted to see her unravel piece by piece. The legacy and unanswered questions. To this day, the case of Cindy James remains unsolved. It stands as one of Canada's most enduring cold cases, a tragic mix of mystery, trauma, and institutional failure. Was she a mentally ill woman crying for help in increasingly destructive ways, or was she a genuine victim who was ignored until it was too late? Could both things be true at once? There were too many coincidences, too many injuries that seemed too severe to be self-inflicted, too many unanswered questions like how her body turned up in a previously searched location, why the knots were so complex, or who could have given her a fatal dose of morphine without leaving any trace. But perhaps the biggest question is this: how many times does a woman need to say she's afraid before she's truly believed? Cindy James died alone and afraid after years of begging for help, years of trying to escape a shadow that may have been real or imagined, or both. In the end, she was silenced, not just by death, but by a system that failed to listen. Her story is a warning about the dangers of ignoring the cries of the vulnerable, about the blurry line between mental illness and real victimization, and about how easy it is to look away when the truth is too complicated to understand. Cindy once said, "I'm going to be killed, and it's going to look like suicide." Whether those were the words of a paranoid mind or the final prophecy of a woman who knew too much is something we may never know. That's it for today's video. Make sure to like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more related content. See you again